Hi, my name is Mark Hefner. I'm the training coordinator here with the Johnstone Supply Training Center. Today we're going to do spring maintenance tips. So of course we chose the newest unit. There's the best thing we ever could. This particular beauty. There's a few reasons why we want to do system maintenance. Number one is to ensure that we have proper heat exchange across our coils on our system. Two is warranty. Equipment manufacturers like it when there's service agreements. And lastly, we want to make sure we spot any potential issues before it actually shuts your system down. As we begin our maintenance, we're actually going to shut the system down right now just for safety. There will be parts of operation where of course we will turn it back on, but for the first things we'll do, we'll go ahead and turn it off right now. So now that the system is powered down and we've got our panel removed, of course, the first thing I always like to do is visual observation of the unit to start looking for any potential signs of wear and tear or that things might be going bad possibly. It's always a good idea to look at the contactor itself, make sure it's not pitted, burnt, it's not showing, it doesn't have any loose wires on it, things like that. Always good to check all your connections here and make sure nothing is popping free or has worked loose. As we look at the actual control board on here, you'll be able to notice there's a little bit of browning on the circuit board here. That's just a sign of wear. It could be a potential service call depending on your company and their policy. So it's possible you might want to change that circuit board out there. But again, we're just looking at the overall condition of the unit. I'll notice I have a loose capacitor in here, actually two loose capacitors in here. Those are some easy things we can fix as part of our maintenance. All right, among the first things we'll check here, of course, is the capacitors. This should be a 40 microfarad, so we'll want to disconnect this, of course. And if you want a more in-depth look at how to check capacitors, we have another video on that as well. And this one reads at 39.5, which is within the tolerance. So this one can go back and we'll get it fastened in better here later. That would be for our compressor. We'll also check the cap. That'll be for our condenser as well. And this one is a 7.5 microfarads. So there's 7.4, which should be just within our tolerance still. So that can go back in there. Another common thing we can check while we're here is we can ohm out our contactor to make sure that's still working properly. So again, we'll disconnect this. We have our meter set to ohms. This is a 24 volt contactor, so our resistance shouldn't be too high. We're reading at 18, which is okay. So the contactor should still be working as well. So those would be the first few things we can check here in this system. Just running along the AC side, of course, we're not looking to check all the heating components right now. Some of the next things we'll look at is we'll go into our blower compartment where we'll also find our evap coil. The evap coil itself, we'll want to make sure it's not excessively dirty. We want to make sure there's no damage on it. And we're going to look for oil or potential sites of leaks. Overall, this coil looks pretty good to me. It wouldn't hurt to put a cleaner on there. There's lots of different kinds of cleaners you can get that are spray-on that you don't have to rinse off. They're quite easy to use. For the blower wheel and housing, we want to make sure the housing is secure, the blower wheel is secure, not moving around, rattling, and even that the wheel inside the squirrel cage can spin freely and isn't interrupted or anything. There's no squealing, there's no sounds of bad bearing or anything like that. So overall, this motor checks out okay, this housing looks good, and our evap coil looks good. So we'll go ahead and move on to one last compartment before we get on to the condenser coil. Cool, so the final compartment we'll check is the compressor. We'll again just look at the wires here, make sure there's no rubbing or insulation that's being stripped away. Make sure that the plug is fully inserted in the compressor. And while we're here also, we can look at the drain. Obviously the system isn't currently hooked up into a house, so I don't have a proper condensate drain. But if you have a bottle of water handy, you can pour some water in just to make sure the system is actually draining properly. There's no clog. It's not overflowing into an emergency pan and things like that. Right, now we've got our system running, of course. Everything's energized. We can take our amp readings for our compressor, our condenser fan motor, and the blower motor. So my first one right here, I've got my compressor we can amp. I'm sitting at about 9.4 amps. The manufacturer label shows that I can be at 13, so we're doing well there. I'm going to go to my condenser fan motor. Sitting at 1.3 amps, well within reason. And lastly, we look at the blower motor, and this is our ECM, 2.9 amps. So all are working pretty well there. I'm pretty happy with that number. Now that we have a general idea of how the unit's running, we've seen that all the components are in working order so far. The last thing we want to do is clean the condenser coil. It can get dirt, debris, leaves on it, dog hair. So we're going to go ahead and clean it to make sure it can have proper heat exchange. So depending on how dirty your coil is, it might require more than just water to actually clean it. It may require chemicals as well. Some coils are also too deep, which means you might want to hit it from the inside to really make sure you get all of the contaminants and particles out of it. So depending on the needs of the AC unit, you'll know whether or not you need to use chemical cleaners as well, or if you can just rinse it with water. This has been Spring Maintenance Tips. I know that people have different procedures and orders for how they do it, and I'd be interested in seeing your checklist in the comments below. But for this and any other training needs, come check us out at the Johnstone Supply Training Center, where you get real-world experience for your real-world career.